Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Jaipur Lit Fest, for having me. It's an honor and it's also a great pleasure to be here. I wanted to just introduce the book briefly and to give you a sense of the central ideas animating the project. Just waiting for the slides to come on. Yeah, so I tell a story of India from the late 1930s to the present moment through the lives of 9 women athletes. And in particular, I want to explain this, this ambitious claim running through the middle of the cover, a women's history of India through the lens of sport. I begin in the 1940s with Mary D'Souza. That's Mary. She was a double international, which means that she ran track for India and she played hockey. And the large horizontal photograph is the opening. So this is India marching in the opening ceremony of the 1952 Helsinki Games, Olympic Games. So if you focus at the center of the photograph, you'll see 3 or 4 women dressed in what looks like salwar kurtas and sleeveless blazers. So that is the Indian team's women. The 1952 Helsinki Olympics is the first time that India sent women to the Olympics, and India is actually, that's apparently how the Finns spell India. So this is the Indian women. These 4 women comprise the Indian women's contingent at the first games where women were sent from India. So in the middle is Mary. You'll recognize her from the previous slide, the lovely big curls. To her right is Dolly Nazir. She swam for India. And to her left is Nilama Ghosh. She ran track for India. And this was the official outfit of the Indian team. So this salwar kurta, and if you focus on the blazer or the jacket, you'll see that the crest has the Ashok Chakra. So that's the official Indian outfit. The big horizontal photograph is the 4th Indian woman at the Helsinki Games. This is Aarti Saha, remains the youngest Indian ever at the Olympics at 11 years and some months. And a couple of years after the 1952 Helsinki Games became the first Asian woman to swim across the English Channel. But my book and my focus is not on sportswomen in general, it's only on runners. Why? Because I think running is the most minimal sport. You don't need equipment. Until about 5 years ago, you didn't even need shoes to run on the track. Now that rule has changed. You don't need necessarily a team. And you don't even need to learn to run. Of course, you need to train to do it well. But so my focus is only on runners. But more than that, why is this a women's history of India through the lens of sport? Why sport? Because sport gives women the legitimacy to cross the threshold from the private sphere of the home into the public sphere. Women's citizenship in the private sphere is unquestioned. As mothers and wives, we are revered. But when we step out into the public sphere, our status as equal citizens is a lot less certain. We know this instinctively. I call it the Lakshman Rekha of citizenship. And sports, I argue, gives women the legitimacy to cross this Lakshman Rekha. Why? Because sports is seen as inherently nationalistic. It's a performance of nationalism. This is a 3-tiered idea. And the first tier of the idea is that the high noon of nationalism is also the start of organized sport. If I could put a date to it, I would say 1896, which is the first edition of the modern Olympics. 1904 is FIFA, which is the World Football Association. FIFA set up in 1904. 1911 or 12, the International Tennis Association sets up its rules. A little bit before that, in the 1870s, the first official test match is played between Australia and England. So as momentum is gathering for World War I, we already see nations lined up against one another on the sports field. The other twin of sports and nationalism is a cinema. I'm not really going to speak much about that, except to say that, look at that date, 1895. Quizzers may know, Lumiere Brothers premiered what is known as the first film, Arrival of a Train in Paris. And both sports and nationalism are enormous platforms. Sorry, both sports and cinema are enormous platforms for nationalism. I have a little video clip later on in the presentation which I think illustrates that very well. The second tier of the argument is that men go to war and perform nationalism. How do women perform nationalism? Because mostly women still don't go to war. The combat roles that have been opened up for women are really a very, very, very tiny niche, despite whatever blockbuster Hindi film is playing now, but it's a very, very tiny niche actually. So how do women perform nationalism? So historically, we see that the suffragist movement, as you know, is the movement that lobbied to give women the vote. So historically, the suffragist movement, very prominent in the US and the UK, makes its most significant gains in 1918 and 19. Why? Because that is the end of World War I, and women were seen as having performed their duty for the nation. So this is one of my favorite posters from the US Library of Congress website. There are many, many more posters like this, but I liked this one in particular. I mean, it's an obvious subtext. They're asking for stenographers, but look at the background. There's a soldier in the background. So clearly, women are being called on to take on the roles of men while men are in the front lines. And the third tier of my argument is that sports offers women the platform to perform nationalism. The first section of my book, so my book is broadly 3 sections. The first section of my book is the early pioneers. I traveled from the 1940s to the 1980s. I've already introduced you to Mary. There's Kamaljit Sandhu, first Indian woman to win an individual gold outside India. December 1970 Asian Games, she actually defeats an Olympic medalist, a Taiwanese athlete called Chi Cheng, who had won bronze in the 1968 Mexico Olympics. And then Usha, I mean, doesn't need any introduction. The second section of my book, which is where we are now, is very different. It tells the story of 3 athletes who are called out broadly for not being women. This section travels only from 2006 to 2015, so less than a decade. And I tell the stories of Shanti Soundarajan, Pinky Pramanik, and Duti Chand. So very briefly, Shanti Soundarajan, one of the finest middle distance runners India has produced, wins the silver at the 2006 Doha Asian Games. This photograph is actually her at the podium. And then she's stripped off the medal for failing what the media broadly calls a gender test, but it's actually a sex test. And sports has a long and unsettling history of sex testing. Only women are tested for sex, for the obvious reason. Men are not tested for sex because the anxiety is that men disguise themselves as women to win medals in the women's category. Because remember, sports is only played in 2 categories, women and men, so male and female. So only women are tested for sex. Brief history of sex testing. In the beginning, there were nude parades. You walked nude in front of gynecologists and other doctors, so basically an anatomical test. Then there were 2 sets of chromosome tests. So there was the bar body test and then the SRY sex determining Y region test. In 1999, compulsory sex testing, the era of compulsory sex testing is over. So Shanti Soundarajan is actually the first athlete in the world to be tested for sex after that era of compulsory sex testing is over. So now the rule is that only if someone complains are you tested for sex. So that's Shanti. And an important point to remember, the Indian government and the sports authorities dump her like a defective toy, but Karunanidhi's government, the DMK government in Tamil Nadu, gives her a 15 lakh rupee check, and then Chief Minister Karunanidhi says, this is the body that won the medal, which is a beautiful statement, I think. Then we have Pinky Pramanik, not called out on the field, called out, accused by her housemate of rape, and wins her case in the Calcutta High Court. But interestingly, this is happening in 2012. If this was 2013, the results may have been very different. If I had a little more time, I would ask you why 2013 makes such a difference. But yeah, so Pinky Pramanik, and then Duti Chand, who is called out for unnaturally high levels of testosterone in her blood. So the language of sex testing is very sophisticated and complex, and it gets more and more sophisticated all the time. The media, of course, says she's failed a gender test again, but she's called out for having very high levels of naturally occurring testosterone. So but what happens in Duti's case is that the government of India defends her and takes her case to the Supreme Court of Sport, which is the Court of Arbitration in Lausanne, and Duti wins her case. So we see the needle moving from Shanti, who's dumped like a defective toy, to Pinky, who wins her case in the Calcutta High Court, to Duti Chand, who wins and briefly changes Olympic rules for the 2016 Rio Games. I have a clip from the 1936 Berlin Olympics, very, very infamous, but also has something to say about sex in sport. We don't have audio. Can you fix the audio, please? Shall we skip this then? Yeah. So forget it. Skip the audio. Thank you. So I'll just run you through very briefly what happens is, we all know this as the Nazi Olympics, famous for the Jesse Owens episode where Jesse Owens wins 4 medals. But interestingly, what happens in this display of Nazi supremacy is this woman called Gretel Bergman, Margaret Lambert, later on in life, she's called back from England. She's a Jew, and asked to represent Germany, or to show up for Germany in the...
As soon as the American team.
No, can you just yeah, thank you so much, thank you. So she comes back on Hitler's orders, and then at the last moment she's replaced by this androgynous looking athlete called Dora Ratian, and she's kicked off the team. She's told that she's not good enough, and a couple of years later it is found, in 1938, Dora Ratian is found to be a man on a train. And what the story says, I feel, is that I don't think Dora, and Dora Ratian was actually Herman Ratian, I don't think Herman Ratian was a cheat. What had happened was that Herman was born with the features, with the anatomy of a girl, and was brought up like a girl, but with puberty started developing some of the features of a biological male. So actually, I don't think, in fact, if you just search the story on the internet, you'll see that Herman Ratian had a very disturbed life and was not a cheat. If anybody was a cheat, it was the government. And nation states often do that. If anybody paid attention to the slide on Shanti Soundarajan, it said that the Doha medal was her 13th international medal. So her sex could not have been a surprise to the authorities. They were very aware. What I feel is that all these three athletes are what you'd call intersex individuals, and that the United Nations has a figure that 1.7% babies are born intersex, which is a very large number if you think about it. It's 2 out of 100 babies. The third section of my book is broadly about the post-liberalization years. I tell the stories of Lalita Babar and this school called the Sunrise Project in Sagroli, which is a village in Nanded, one of the districts in Marathwada, synonymous with Marathwada is synonymous with drought and farmer debt and farmer suicide. So Lalita is the first first Indian woman after Usha to qualify for an Olympic track and field final. 32 years after 1984, she qualifies at the 2016 Olympic Games in Rio. One of the best steeplechasers, but also one of the best long distance runners that India has produced, wins the Mumbai Marathon from 2012 to 2014, a hat trick of wins, and many, many other marathons. She represents in my book the shift to road running or long distance running. And I analyze this through the lens of a Marxist geographer called David Harvey. David Harvey says that he notices that the big city marathons, so London, Tokyo, New York, they start in the late 1970s, which is when the welfare state starts to wither. And the New York City Marathon actually moves out of being a race in the Central Park and becomes a road race in 1976, which is the year the New York municipality goes bankrupt. He also notices that big city marathons tend to be sponsored by banks and financial institutions, which is the case with the Mumbai Marathon as well. Until recently, it was the Standard Chartered Marathon. And he has this wonderful phrase, marathons showcase gleaming bodies and gleaming cities. And it always makes me think of, the runners, which is the photograph that you see most often in the media, the runners coming across the beautiful sea link in Bombay. So Lalita Babar and the Sunrise Project, and very different from the 9 athletes, but there's also me, a hobby runner shaped by the neoliberal marathon ecosystem, as David Harvey calls it. And I realized that one of the motifs of Forrest Gump is the shoes, and Forrest was also a runner. And I think of this book as a story, or as a story told in the Forrest Gump template, which is that telling the story of a nation through the lives of one person or through a few lives intimately. Just, I'm not going to play the video here, but just some images to show that, Hindi cinema articulates this relationship between sports and citizenship with far greater ease. It took me 8.5 years and more than 100,000 words to say this. But you repeatedly see this motif of wearing the nation. There might be a brief moment of video, but yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sohini. So can we have a show of hands? How many of you are runners? There we go. That's your people. That's your tribe. How many of you have picked up the book? How many of you have read the book? Incredible. Thank you. I'm going to start by asking Sohini, and we're definitely going to have time for audience questions, to please articulate them, keep them ready. Talk to us about how your personal journey intersected with this book, which is like a magnum opus. And as you've shown us, it's historical, it's very personal. You're looking at this through several different lenses. But how does your journey really begin with this book?
My journey began in grief. And running was my map out of that grief. I feel like many people, I feel like grief is heavy. It's heavy. It sits in somewhere between the chest and the stomach. And I felt running allowed me a way to dislodge that. weight. But that was the beginning. But what I sensed as a runner, I began running in Delhi, in the DDA colony parks. I sense that in every which way, I'm very privileged. I'm upper caste, I'm upper middle class. But when I began running in Delhi, I realized that people were looking at me. I was not as welcome in public space as I had been in everything else. So this was a new feeling as a citizen, because I've always been able to walk in everywhere. And that's what caste and class privilege gives you, right? So I started to examine that because I could feel people's gaze on my skin. So I started to examine that. Why do I feel like I'm not belonging here? Or why am I not welcome? So I used that as a lens to examine my citizenship and women's citizenship. And sports, I feel, and I tried to explain why sports is the obvious way to look at citizenship. But really, this is a book, it is very much about sport. I love sport writing myself. So it is about sport, it is about gender and sex, but it is a book about citizenship, and it emerged from my personal quest that why do I feel that I'm not an equal citizen in public space. And we have this, right? Like politically, what the vote has given us, that we are all equal. We all have one vote. But there are so many other dimensions to citizenship, right? Financial, social, psychological, emotional. So this book is an examination of citizenships.
And I think, most of the women in the audience will attest to the fact that public spaces don't always feel like there are spaces, right? Despite whatever your levels of privilege. When you look at exploring public spaces as a runner, and as you do in your book very masterfully, interweaving your story, your personal journey with these legends that you write about, I'd love to ask you a little bit more about that. Are there, did you feel this attitude change? You talk about some of the sort of neighborhood aunties who are looking at you, proudly beaming, cheering you on as they see you day after day after day. Is there a city, you've run in several cities, I think, now in India, right? Is there a city that feels a little bit more comfortable for you? Do you feel this community around you now? Runners coming up to you and being like, hey, you're one of us. There is a bit of a tribe around running also that's sort of picked up over the years?
No, actually. I don't think so.
Is that just marathoners then? Because the marathoners tell me they have a strong community.
Yeah, I still, in general, for men, women, for everybody, I feel Indian cities are terrible public spaces for running. In fact, that's one of the most interesting things that one of the reviewers in my book, Menaka Guruswamy, wrote that as I say myself, that running is the most minimal sport, but her analysis was running is actually the most expensive sport because it requires investment in public infrastructure, and it's absolutely true. So you're also thinking about the most banal things like, will I fall down here because the pavement is broken, because metro construction work is happening. Our cities are not at all public spaces for anybody, men and women. But for women in particular, somebody was asking me recently, many people have asked me this, do you listen to music? Absolutely not. I feel terrified of listening to me, because I always have to keep my ears open in case somebody's coming from the back. And I don't feel comfortable running in Indian cities at all, not even in Bombay, which is my favorite city. Definitely not. And the marathon point is interesting, what you bring up. So if you look at, objectively, if you look at numbers, marathon registrations for women are going up. Is going up. There's no doubt about that. But I always say that, but the one number which is not going up is the female labor force participation rate. Those should be connected, right? If women are more comfortable putting themselves out there, so to speak, why is the female labor force participation rate stubbornly low?
which is a huge challenge, and I think something we will have to have another full session on. Let me ask you a little bit about what it was like for you to meet these incredible icons in the course of writing this book. You do talk a little bit about that process. It's actually quite fascinating. You do have to earn their trust in many ways. Some of them have been burned pretty badly. When you talk about feeling let down by the system, the country, even the media. So can you talk us through a little bit about that experience?
About what it was like to meet all of them or any one particular...
Maybe a couple of them. How did you feel that you earned their trust? How did you feel that process was? Were you willing to give up on anyone if they didn't respond to you? Because you do also, there's a lot of perseverance in this. Like you wait, you make sure that, they know you're taking this seriously. Some of them, not to generalize too much, but once they know that you're also passionate about running, it does, I think, make a difference.
Actually, I didn't dare tell anybody that I'm a runner because they would laugh. Because they are such fantastic and such serious athletes. And the process of, I guess, what I was most excited about was meeting P.T. Usha, because she's the one I grew up watching. She was the icon in the 80s. And Usha was surprisingly easy to meet. She's very professional, so you can tell that she's had years of experience of dealing with the press. So you write to her and she or somebody at the Usha School of Athletics responds immediately. Within 48 hours you get a email. But it's actually really difficult to pin her down because she was, and I was doing this in 2018 and 2019 before she became an MP, but she's a really busy person. And she also runs this fantastic academy called the Usha School of Athletics. But when I met her, when I finally pinned her down and met her, I felt, so I've written that in the book. It felt like she had come, I talk about this one Doordarshan national integration ad where all these sports people are running with torch. And it felt like Usha had just come running out of the television when I met her, although she was older and a slightly different looking, but yeah, it felt like that. And I talk about this in the book, I was slightly disappointed with her personal views on politics, because when I met her was when the anti-CAA Citizenship Amendment Act protests were going on, and she had a very, very different view of these women. So remember 2019 December, it was the Shaheen Bagh protest, December 2020, right up to the COVID lockdown actually. So all these women were out, and I thought Usha, being a women's icon, running an athletics academy for women would be full of admiration for women coming out to protest. But so I was disappointed with that, with her politics. It was really difficult to meet the three athletes who had been called out for not being women, because they had been burnt by and they had been traumatized by the media reporting on them. And I think one thing I realized while reporting the book is that I'm not saying that we are not an intelligent society, but we are not a very literate society. So explaining to people that you are intersex is not easy. And the media has not made any of this easy by saying, gender test, failed a gender test, because most people think of this as you're some sort of freak. So they were burned by the media and they were very reluctant to talk. So the last person I interviewed and spent time with for the book is Shanti Soundarajan. And eventually actually she was the most open of everybody. But it took me more than 3 years to convince her. So that happened. Then one of the athletes agreed to speak with me, gave me some time, and then stopped speaking with me. I thought, to answer your question about putting this in the book, it is a running theme in the book that, the give and take between interviewee and interviewer, me. I feel like this also is a part of the process, of the research process. And we tend to see books or documentary films as such, finished projects of certainty. But there's a lot of uncertainty in it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring that in.
Yeah, and you do it really well. I think the other thing you do very well is I sort of interweave your own story, as your readers know in the audience, bits of your own story and journey. And when we were talking earlier, you pointed out you do want to bring in 3 generations. You do bring in your grandmother, your mother, and yourself. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so there are 2 threads in the book. One is the relatively public thread. I say relatively because none of these athletes, barring Duti Chand and P.T. Usha, are well known. But the relatively public thread of history from the 1930s to now through their lives. And the other thing I had attempted is to tell the story of post-independent India through my grandmother, my mother, and my story, which is typically something novelists do, particularly if there are novels on partition and independence. You usually use the metaphor of the family. So I thought I would attempt marrying the two, a thread of family history and a more public thread of history.
And have you had any reactions that maybe surprised you or you wouldn't have seen coming, whether from family, friends, people you don't know, anyone in the community? Any reactions that have come in yet?
I guess I thought the most surprising insight was that insight that I've already shared, which is that yes, running is a minimal sport. It requires no investment in training, but it is actually the most expensive sport because it requires I thought that was a very insightful way of looking at it. So that's come as a surprise. But so far, no, I guess maybe enough people haven't read the book yet.
Well, we have a bunch in the audience. I don't know if any of you have questions you want to share. Okay, yes, see? Can we start giving mics across? There's one more in the first row. We can then share it further.
Thank you, Amrita, for very clear nepotism here.
It was the enthusiasm with which you raised your hand before anyone else jumps on that.
Right. So, Sohini, this is a question from one runner to another. You talked about the inclusion and exclusion in public spaces. But do you feel that, despite the democratization of space or the claims of democratization of space in running as a sport, it is still very exclusive. There is still a very elite club, even when it comes to road running. And as an amateur, do you feel that it is not a great point to start for a woman?
Let me answer the first one. I think in every which way, our citizenship is divided into private and public. So even, I was doing a talk with a book club where somebody said that even swimming pools in India tend to have timings, like ladies' timing and men's timing. Sometimes some gyms, not all gyms, but some gyms will have timings when the women are allowed to come in and when the men are. So I feel like in every aspect of our life, this, the public sphere and the private, this divide in citizenship is actually there. Say even in the professional kitchen, women are seen as cooks and men are seen as chefs. Of course, there are women who are also chefs. But even in professional kitchens, you will see that women tend to do bakery more often and men tend to do the meat and the real cooking. So I feel it's there everywhere, this division in citizenship. Your second question was, is it a hard place to start to be an amateur runner? Yeah, let me answer this from the sports lens. I think one thing that I learned being a hobby runner and reporting this book is that sports is a very, very demanding career. And you often hear this in India, typically it's men who say this, that Indians just don't have the killer instinct in sport. They don't have what it takes to win. But it's actually, we are a very resource poor country. One of the things I realized while reporting the book is how hungry we are, So Duti Chand, Sister Saraswati Chand, when she gets a job as a police constable in Odisha at the age of 22 or 23, gets a salary of 7,000 rupees, that is the first time the family eats eggs. That is how poor we are. There are many such stories. Shanti Soundarajan would stand with utensils outside village feasts to collect food leftovers that were given. And because she's Dalit, she would put the utensils on the ground so that there is no touching of the utensil also. Utensil to utensil caste system. So, as a very hobby sports person, I would say that it's a very, very demanding career, and it's not at all easy to, even do podium finishes in national meets. And India actually tends to do quite well at the Asian Games, which is not as bad as it seems like. It's not some third grade competition, because remember, Asia includes China. So we are actually pretty good, I think.
One here and then there are a couple in that.
गुड आफ्टरनून मैम मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि इंडिया जो हाईएस्ट पॉपुलेशन इंडिया की है पूरे ऑल ओवर वर्ल्ड के अंदर, लेकिन रिप्रेजेंटेशन ओलंपिक के अंदर जो है इंडिया का परफॉर्मेंस रहे वो बहुत कम रहता है. बहुत सारे ऐसे स्पोर्ट्स हैं जैसे जिम्नास्टिक, रिदम जिम्नास्टिक, ऐसे बहुत सारे स्पोर्ट्स हैं जिनके अंदर इंडियन प्लेयर्स देखने को भी नहीं मिलते. ऐसा क्यों है? और एंटी डोपिंग टेस्ट उनके अगेंस्ट होते हैं, सेक्स डिटर्मिनेशन उनका करवाया जाता है. क्या ऐसा, या अपन लॉज के बारे में इंटरनेशनल रेगुलेटिंग जो अथॉरिटीज़ हैं स्पोर्ट्स की, या उनके रूल्स रेगुलेशंस हम अडॉप्ट नहीं कर पा रहे हैं, समझ नहीं पा रहे हैं, या इंडिया का स्टेटस स्पोर्ट्समैन या अपनी जो अथॉरिटीज़ हैं, नेशनल अथॉरिटीज़, स्पोर्ट्स अथॉरिटीज़, उनका रिप्रेजेंटेशन प्रॉपर नहीं हो पाता, तो इतना उनके साथ चार्जेस इन पर लगाए जाते हैं, परफॉर्मेंस अपना प्रॉपर नहीं होता. इसके पीछे क्या रीज़न है? हम गली गली में हमारे लीडर्स तो बॉर्न हो जाते हैं, स्पोर्ट्स पर्सन क्यों नहीं हो पाते हैं?
Can somebody quickly translate the question for me?
All of the controversies we're seeing, when you're seeing, she's talked about the doping laws, the intersex laws. Why are we not able to see, more sports champions from our gullies when you can see the political leaders? Is the problem not just representation, but organizational support? Do we not know the rules, etc., etc.?
So I think I answered some of it in the previous long answer I gave about how demanding sports is as a career. And we are actually a very poor country. This is my learning based on my reportage across 6 states. And we are a very hungry country as well. Absolutely, I mean hunger in the most obvious way.
Yeah. Do you think there's something to this point of us not understanding the rules? Like they keep changing the rules, and so our athletes are not, for example, the anti-doping, the intersex test. Do you think the systems...
I'm not going to go into doping, but the sex determination test, which she did mention, so that I touched on, and I said that, it is a very sophisticated science, the science of sex in sport. And remember that sport is the only domain in contemporary life which polices this distinction between male and female. No other domain polices this distinction like literally polices it. And there are many elements involved. I'll just broadly say anatomy, chromosomes, and hormones. So testosterone is just one hormone. And the language is also constantly changing. The parameters are constantly changing. And I thought the Duti Chand example was great, and the government of India going to defend Duti was an incredible moment, really, because that's why I say that, you travel from 2006 to 2015 and see how much has changed. They argue many things. It's all in the public domain. It's a 160-page document, the Court of Arbitration in Sport. But what the government of India's one of their main arguments is that if you don't have a ceiling on naturally occurring height, which affects your stride length, why do you have a ceiling on testosterone? Naturally occurring testosterone, not dope. So Duti was not called out for dope.
Yeah.
It's naturally occurring. So if...
आपने वो दूती चंद वाला केस आपने पढ़ा होगा. ठीक है. Okay, we'll come back to you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, hi. I've read 4 chapters. I'm enjoying the book.
Thank you.
Yeah. I have 2 questions. You mentioned in the interview also, and you have mentioned in the book that you were kind of dismayed after meeting PT Usha about her political views, and you mentioned that, you know, there was my Usha and there was the Usha I met, and they won't even hear the word feminist. So I want to know, after the book was published, did she read it? Did she had any reaction to it? And another is, you sort of, start at 1940s, then you mention in the book that, you know, PT Usha, when she first goes to the Olympics, the Indian officials kind of ignore her. And then recently we have seen OP Jaisha's case. She finishes the marathon but faints, and the whole controversy follows. How much has actually changed for women in sport in India?
So I'll tell you to look at the wrestlers' protest which was unfolding until recently. How much do you think has changed? Usha has not, if she has read the book, she hasn't yet told me, but her husband, who functions as her manager, Srinivasan sir, has acknowledged receipt of the book.
There's one question there.
Hello, my question is I live in Chandigarh, and it probably has the best running infrastructure in the country.
That's what I say in the book as well.
Yeah. So, but I don't see a culture of running there as well. I mean, your views on that why could that be, you know, possibly be? And the second part is that I recently read that Peter Thiel is sponsoring another Olympics where doping will be allowed. So, do you think that doping will be normalized in the coming years?
Chandigarh actually features in my book because it's the home of Kamaljeet Sandhu, and it's an important point in my book, and I make this statement, that the same statement that you made, which is I feel like Chandigarh represents, I believe Kapil Dev had once said this, right, that he couldn't believe that, he thought that every place in India would be like Chandigarh. He couldn't believe that there were cities that were not like Chandigarh because it's so well planned. And so I actually say that Chandigarh gives you the sense of the promise of a new nation. I did run in Chandigarh as well when I was there to interview Kamaljeet Sandhu those couple of weeks. There were actually some women running, but in general, that divide between the public sphere and the private sphere is my answer to your question. You feel it running through every aspect of life.
To the lady in the red, and then we have one more. We'll try and get both of these in and then see.
Hi, I loved the book. I found it deeply, deeply moving.
Thank you.
My question is, through the interviews that I've done, was there some viewpoint that you held on your own that was deeply challenged? Was there some opinion that you had that changed through the writing of this book?
Yeah, the gentleman, the specs, and what we used to call a narrow jacket, I think. No, in front also?
My question is,
We'll try and come to you.
my question is, why don't sports books sell?
Oh my.
It doesn't sell. Even if it's a cricket book, it doesn't sell as much.
Our publishers are here. They will answer this question. They're here, right
Okay,
here.
let's do the first question and then this last one. We have 5 minutes, so we'll try and get these both in.
Hi, thank you for the great talk. I just wanted to point out on the nationalism bit that you touched upon, and it's a big spectrum of years that you cover, and I'm just deeply saddened with the stories that you're sharing, that, you know, after the sports persons are done with kind of showing that kind of nationalism, representing, you know, themselves for the country, what happens to those sports persons post life is something I am deeply saddened. And we still see, cricket stories come up a lot, that some cricketers are not doing as well as they were doing when they were playing cricket, but I'm sure that's the case with athletics as well. And I just want to know your view, how that has changed over the course of your book and over the course of athletes that you have tracked. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let me take that one first. So I think the infusion of private money has really made a difference. So, you know, while I'm not a fan of watching IPL cricket, but I think it's a great blessing. In that sense, although I said that I take this Marxist geographer David Harvey's view, I think I do take his view. he makes a very valid point about marathons showcasing a particular aspect of particular cities, usually the sexy parts of cities. You won't have the Bombay Marathon going through Dharavi, for instance, not yet. But I think we also see, not just in cricket, for instance, so a lot of the, like the badminton medals, and we are a badminton superpower right now. And that has come from private academies. Even Neeraj Chopra, although he was a Naik Subedar in the Indian Army, which is one of the oldest pillars of support for sport. So we've got like a ton of hockey medals, and they've all been men's hockey. They've all been army men. But even Neeraj Chopra had support from Jindal and so I think that is a boon. And actually I have dealt with this in the book, in the Sunrise project, that there are now plan Bs and Cs which are also sport related. So you can actually, the first plan A is still, government job, grade 4 or grade 3, railways, police, forestry, those sort of departments. But plan B is now sometimes being a coach in a private academy. Plan C can be a fitness instructor. So that I feel has improved. What was the question on publishing? I will not be able to answer that. I am a huge fan of sports books. And I love reading sports books. So
more and more non-fiction books are selling, from what I understand. More of you will buy this book, so sports books will come back. Sorry, what was the question you had asked in the red? Can you just remind us in a line?
Oh right, what have I? What views of mine have been challenged?
Thank you.
I would say that I remain deeply empathetic to the 3 athletes I profile who are called out for not being female enough. But I think I also understand. So most other athletes I speak, every other athlete I have profiled in the book, and their coaches and the entire ecosystem has no empathy, sympathy for these. They see them as cheats, freaks, whatever. So I'm less critical of that than I was to begin with, because the history of organized sport is also the history of women fighting their way to participate in sport. So 1896 Olympics, not a single woman was permitted to compete, and the founding father of the modern Olympics, Pierre de Coubertin, is on the record saying that it is very unbecoming, very unfeminine for women to be sweaty and to show their bodies in public. Their role is to be perfumed and to clap from the galleries. There's that famous photograph that I have in my book of Catherine Switzer, a bald man pushing her. So Catherine Switzer is the second woman to compete in the Boston Marathon. Women were not allowed to compete, and she was nearly pushed out. That photo is in the book. So I'm less critical, because women have fought every Olympics. You see a number of categories of sport are opened up for women for the first time. So women have fought. So I guess I'm saying that, I've become slightly more conservative, which is generally a feature of aging. So now that I am getting older, I'm becoming more conservative.
We want to take this moment to thank all of you for being here. We know it's lunchtime, but Sohini will be signing some books. Thank you to the readers. Thank you so much for a wonderful chat,
Thank you, Amrita, for being such a wonderful reader, such an early champion. Thank you, Asifa, right? You are Asifa, I hope. Yeah, thank you for the sign language. Thank you, everybody, for being here.